talk started up. So the next speaker is Lindsay Rax, and she'll be presenting on getting away with murder, hashtag plus human problems.
So a little bit about some work in progress that I've been thinking about since a syntax paper I wrote last year. And I'm going to present some data and a proposal and let you know sort of where I am at with this research. Really, I'm going to be presenting some evidence that suggests that some accomplishments in this lexicalized planning embedded in its event structures actually a tripartite event structure. Background. Humans and animals are often considered equivalent in terms of agency. So definitions of agency surely can vary. Sometimes we get really broad definitions, sometimes we get really narrow definitions. There's also different degrees of membership to what this category of agent. I adopted one here, and I'm looking, I sort of started with this idea of the agent proto-role category presented by Dowdy. So, are really just this collection of properties that prototypical members of a category have. And so I thought this was a good place to start because I thought it would be very narrow and very broad if it's a prototypical sort of thing. But, as I'll show you in a second, it's clear that this doesn't help us distinguish humans in terms of argument assumption. So, the first property volition. So if we look at this, I can have, in these contexts where I'm talking about decision, choice, and will to complete an action, I can use both humans and non-human external arguments. So I've chosen my husband, my dog, and the mouse. So I'll give you a little bit of background about why I'm doing that. So my husband and my dog are sort of two things I'm distinguishing throughout the paper, but I wanted to show that animals that are like pets and things like that. So I wanted to show that these things are possible with an animal that we tend to think of as pests and often kill without giving it any thought. So these things are actually still considered agents. So that's why I included that. So in terms of capacity to feel and receive, again we see that all three of these external argument agents have this property. Same thing with causation. Again, we don't have any distinguishing between these human and non-human external argument agents. Movement, pretty self-explanatory, all of these things. And independent existence, which is really just the fact that the referent exists outside of this verb. Again, all of these things have this. So I was left with a sort of, I was at a loss to how do we distinguish these things? And then I started looking a little bit at some different verb classes. So some verbs require so in particular, verbs of killing. So my husband murdered the mailman. Well, that's in real world not okay, but grammatically this is good. My dog murdered the mailman is odd. However, fine in both the cases where we have a human and non-human external argument agent. Some verbs of possessional deprivation. So my husband robbed the woman is a-okay. My dog robbed the woman is weird. However, we don't see the same thing with stole. And so I decided to compare these verbs in particular only because they sort of, well, they're both result in someone dying at the hand or paw of someone else. Robbing and stealing, also there's this property against someone else as well. So, alright, so just to sum up here, murder, kill, rob, and steal, all okay with the human external argument. Murder and with animal external arguments. And I'm going to propose that in English, planning is grammaticalized as a strictly human property. And for some, is planning stage in the event structure. So, a little bit of background on event structure. So, there's 4 basic event types: states, activities, achievements, and accomplishment. So states, things like want, love, believe. Yes, having this state. So in the state of wanting, in the state of loving, in the state of believing. Activities are represented, so things like run, walk, breathe, they're represented in terms of this X entity acting in some sort of manner. And so for some verbs, so for example, something like stab would be lexicalized as like stabbing, but killing doesn't necessarily spell death. Achievements, things like recognize, realize, identify, arrive, these are represented that state where we have this change of state happening. Accomplishments, but for accomplishments we have this action causes something to become in this state. So I'm going to focus primarily on just because they do represent about murder, kill, rob, and steal. So a couple diagnostics for activities, achievements, and accomplishments. So I needed some methods of determining event types of the classes of argument selection possible. So I was trying to determine what type of event murder, rob, kill, and steal each were. So the first thing I did was look at temporal adverbs as PPs headed with for and in. So in terms of activities, activities can mark for PPs, but achievements and accomplishments cannot. So activities take place over a span of time, but there's no specified endpoint. But it's okay to introduce one. So my husband ran for an hour, A-okay. My husband recognized his mistake for an hour with this weird. My husband read a book where we have again this accomplishment, meaning like he picked up a book and then finished it. For an hour is weird. In the sense that it's like reading and finishing a book for an hour, weird. Murdered, killed, robbed, and stole, same thing. So it was clear to me that these things weren't activities, so there's something else going on. Accomplishments can mark duration with in PPs. Okay, so in both achievements and accomplishments, but with achievements, there's no sort of causation up to this achievement point. Accomplishments, something can be happening for a certain amount of time before this instantaneous culmination. And that is why with accomplishments, in an hour is okay, but with achievements, in an hour is not. So my husband recognized his mistake in an hour, not good. My husband read and finished a book in an hour, good. And we see murder, killed, robbed, and stole patterning that way. So I came to the conclusion that murder, kill, rob, and steal are in fact accomplishments. So with human external arguments. So if murder, kill, rob, and steal are all accomplishments, why do we still see this selection restriction? So we got to a point where I was just left with another question. I still don't know what is this thing humans and animals, or humans and non-humans in this argument selection. But again, I had this notion, this idea that planning was somehow grammaticalized as strictly human property, and that mental capabilities of external arguments are encoded in syntax through argument selection. So this is shown in the time lag between planning and action. So one of the differences is encoded in So again, recall that kill can select both a human and a non-human external argument. Yesterday, my husband planned to kill a rabbit today. Hey, but yesterday my dog planned to kill a rabbit today is weird. And so now I started figuring out that this plan in our grammar. Again, it's still a little bit weird. So this morning my husband planned to kill a rabbit this afternoon is okay, but this morning my dog planned to kill a rabbit this afternoon is not. So again, we see this mental capability of planning encoded in the syntax. We also don't see planning with achievements. So recall that achievements and accomplishments both result in this change of state. However, with achievements, the change of state happens instantaneous. With accomplishments, we have this sort of action that takes part that eventually causes this instantaneous. Achievements include this act present in their event structure. Achievements actually do not contain this. So I'm arguing that they don't contain this planning stage because with achievements it's a reaction rather than an action. So reactions are not achievements. So yesterday my husband planned to recognize the man across the street. Not so good. Yesterday my husband planned so if planning is not included in the event structure of achievements, there should be no humanist restriction with achievements. And this is actually what we see. So my husband recognized the man across the street. My husband realized he dropped his keys, both okay. Across the street, both okay. So I looked a little bit into some achievement verbs, and I'm not going to list them here just for time, but none of them necessarily seem to require this human external argument. So again, I'm arguing there's something else about these accomplishments, but I'm going to try to convince you that there's a planning stage in these. So again, I'm going to propose a separate grammatical sub-event. So I'm going to make the distinction here between unplanned accomplishments and planned accomplishments. Can be things like Mary broke the dishes, my husband killed the woman when he bumped into her and she fell and broke her neck. My dog killed the woman in the same way because I was terrible. Planned accomplishments, however, something like my husband murdered the mailman and my husband, again, I'm going to show that there has to be this planning stage involved, and that's exactly why we can't select these non-human arguments. Make the case for we would expect to see this tripartite event structure as well. And that's what I'm trying to get at with my analysis. I just haven't totally got there yet with the structural verbs. But we don't see them in kill and steal. We don't see it lexicalized in the verb like we do with murder and rob. So the event structure of unplanned accomplishment is tripartite, considering of an action, act, and some change of state. Again, we see this action causing some sort of state change. So Mary broke the dishes is represented as Mary taking some action. We don't know, we don't necessarily know what action it is. She could break the dishes by being with face. By dropping them. It's not lexicalized. But Mary somehow does some action which causes the dishes to become broken. So steal and kill do not require a human external argument. So they're not actually planned out. We see the same event structure as the other unplanned accomplishments like broke the dishes. Cause the mailman to be killed doesn't necessarily require this planning. My dog caused the mailman to be killed. Again, you don't necessarily need this planning. I see the same thing with steal. But planning can be included in the event structure of certain accomplishments, resulting in a tripartite event structure with plan, act, and become predicates. So here, I propose this event structure that we see in 26, namely that X plans for X to do some action which caues the result state 1. So alternatively, I'm not going to talk about this today, but we could have X plans for Y to do some action which causes the result state. Another plan is not necessarily the same as the actor, but I'm going to argue in these murder and rob cases, we do see the same actor and planner. So is somewhat the lexical causatives that I found so far, like rob and murder. And so it's a slightly unusual approach that when I extend it to those sentences where we have a different planner and actor, it actually seems to work out nicely so far. So I'm going to kind of stay with this until I get to something that's really problematic. So I would paraphrase this as maybe my husband planned for my husband to do some action. So my husband planned for my husband robbed the woman. Again, my husband planned for himself to cause the woman to be robbed. However, in cases with non-human external arguments, we don't see the same thing because non-human arguments the argument of this plan predicate, because as we saw those examples with my husband, yesterday my husband planned to do something today, yesterday my dog planned to do something today. Again, we grammaticalize this thing as something that is. So, my conclusion is that planning in human entities is really grammaticalized. Non-humans cannot be selected as external arguments for rob and murder. And this distinction can be characterized by type event structure. Next steps. So first, I'm going to work on some motivating reasons for positing the same argument to be selected by the predicates both plan and act. And I'm working at the corresponding syntactic analysis of this for classes in English, specifically by asking which other verbs have this lexicalized planning event structure. If the selectional restrictions outlined in this presentation are found in other languages. I imagine that they are, but what's interesting and sort of difficult about this work is we don't actually know if animals can plan or not. So this is reflecting about these things. Our belief about these things is grammaticalized, but we don't actually. So I imagine that across human languages we're going to see a similar pattern with these types of verbs that have this. So I'd like to thank, in particular, Dr. Betsy Ritter for her valuable feedback on this project and listening to me talk about murder for an entire semester, and to the linguistics office, especially Joey, who sits there and judges sentence for me all day long. But they're really helpful and willing to discuss murder, even if that means we're in line at the coffee shop and discussing how murder is represented in grammar, and we get very strange looks. It happens. All right, thank you.
All right, so we have some time for questions.
Yes.
I have two questions if that's okay. Yeah. So first I wanted to say that this was really interesting. So my first question comes from slide to mark duration and time. And I'm a little thrown off because I believe A is listed for me.
Okay.
So like if you give students, their corrections, and you want them to look at their mistakes, you want them to recognize their mistakes. I can recognize the mistakes in how you can use both to me.
But the recognizing part didn't take an hour, right? Like the leading up to being able to recognize it didn't take an hour.
Let's bring it
It's
time back.
Right.
So yes, I agree that some of these are definitely sentences I've struggled with and have forced interpretations in both directions, which is why I ask my office mates for help with interpretations all the time. Argue again that yes, this recognizing happens instantaneously, which is why we can't modify it with these temporal keys.
Can you stay on this one before you ask your next one? Because I also was curious about your judgments here, like C through F. I don't think are good. So the whole like, I mean, if you call murdering the mailman in an hour like tying him up and dragging him into like a secluded location and like sealing all the doors and like taking out the cameras and then like also killing him, and you did all that in an hour, then it's good. But it's kind of in an hour, like the actual murder did not take an hour, right? And so it's the same for killing Rowan Stoll for me. Like they didn't seem to fit this test for achievement.
Right, so I agree, they're a little bit weird. So I imagine, we're gonna have imagine some disturbing situations. But, so this came up in a discussion in the syntax class, and we were talking about the fact that so this planning, executing an actual culmination of the event can happen in an hour. So you can imagine a situation where he's just super fast at murdering, right? He plans it, and he's out the door, and he does it. And it happens in an hour. So my husband, I agree they're a little bit weird. I do agree with that. But I imagine the act of murdering, again, has this causation built into it. So he's causing the murdering to happen, and the murdering itself is instantaneous when death happens. But I want this causative state can still happen over this time frame.
But if that's how you're construing the event of murdering, then wouldn't that maybe a slight okay? So my husband murdered the man for an hour, oh my god, he's so slow at murdering, he took his seat, tying him up, and it just took forever, under that circumstance, then these would also be okay, I think.
I can see the salient interpretation is a repetitive action. So we have this guy gets murdered and then comes back to life, and then gets murdered again. And so these 4 and out. So that's sort of when I was doing this informal investigation with my peers and faculty members. That's sort of the interpretation I got, was that they're weird. Is that it's a repetitive sort of thing, and that's why they. So again, because we get the same thing with again, right? And so these 4 an hour PPs are weird because it happens even if stuff. So I agree they're for sure, but I think that's sort of the issue.
Actually, right over on this one before we go to yours.
Yeah.
The plurality for all of these ones seems to work just fine. My husband robbed Whit for an hour. You
It's
can
okay.
have a whole bunch of ones in that area. Yeah, you can have basically plurals across the board.
But I
And
think
it's
that
fine.
again, sort of thing, right? So it's culminating
exactly.
and culminating and culminating and culminating.
I was gonna say, at what point then?
This is very preliminary, but for sure. This was just a course paper, and I don't even have because this event structure stuff is complex, but differs between humans and non-humans. So it's very analyzing. So it's not really even generalizable at this point. But I'm hoping that with more work, I can start to build an argument for the fact that we have this tripartite event structure. So something like a half causative, we might say has this tripartite event structure. So some pieces of support for this sort of thing.
With the next slide, I was wondering if part of the problem with C through F is just our real world knowledge of how long it takes to actually murder somebody. So
Wait, so you
like,
have no
you could-
knowledge about how long it takes to murder?
you might be surprised. But if we change it to crucify, so the Romans crucified Jesus in an hour, that probably works unambiguously because it takes a long time, but maybe not that long.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's I guess files and files full of these, trying these examples out. Some of them really work well, and others are not quite as clear. And I think it is because our real world knowledge sort of constrains how these things work. Which is, I mean, really sort of how we see a lot of this interface type stuff anyways. We see how, like, our pragmatic semantics and all that, you know, I guess influences our argument selection. And so I want to try to sort of separate world knowledge from this at this point, because I don't want to start discussing this as if I know for sure animals can't plan, because that's a big problem. I don't know that for sure, and I want to really sort of remove what I know about that and sort of just look at the grammatical facts first. Yes?
Just returning to my question.
Yeah.
Using your argument and analysis so far, I'm wondering what you would have to say about a more nebulous sort of verb, which can be both generative, just completely punctual, like poison.
Okay, so poison is an interesting case because there's a lot of weird causative stuff that happens with poison. So something like the witch poisoning the apple, well, she's causing the apple to be poisoned, which then causes Snow White to be poisoned and things like. So there's weird causative chains, like a little bit, not here, but in the work so far, about this by accident test that I sort of developed to look at these those. So like my husband murdered the man by accident, not good. My husband robbed a woman by accident, killed the mailman by accident is okay. I would say that poison works that sort of way. So my husband poisoned the mailman by accident is okay, right? And so I would say that it's not necessarily lexicalizing this planning event in there. Pattern like kill and steal, in that you could have this tripartite event structure, it's just not lexicalizing the verb.
Can I say one more thing? Because you have this idea of lexicalized, not lexicalized. Do you think there could be a middle ground in some of this lexicalization?
Probably, and I wouldn't, if I start really the time I don't have to this project, right? I might actually find that. It wouldn't surprise me, especially questions are like kind of hard to wildly different for some people.
I just actually wanted to ask, so you're calling this kind of human and planning stage, so it kind of seems to inspire a brain function basically. So if you had like a, animated character, they can just get all that persona. It's not necessarily a planning thing.
Yeah, so I think that those types of things will all factor into this, for sure. And I think that it just goes to show, because there's clear grammatical consequences for it.
The idea that you have that this planning stage is grammaticalized versus it's just real world knowledge, and I mean, the words don't work this way because dogs can't plan.
So I think that that's a really difficult philosophical question. Part of which I tried looking in for this, but it was within a short period of time, like a 4-month semester, but I started looking at anthropology type stuff, and the stuff I was looking at so far suggested that I don't know that that's something that we can ever explicitly know. Well, with primates we might be able to say that, but again, we're sort of imposing. But I don't want to start saying like, for sure animals plan or don't plan, because it's possible they do, and we just don't have any methods for it. And so I want to try to avoid that whole philosophical issue by just sticking to the grammar.
Speaking of which, the murders in the Rue Morgue committed by a primate.
There you go.
That's all the time we have, so thank you very much. And now we have
Yeah.